All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for
Hello.
joining. Thank you for joining today. We're just going to wait a few minutes for more people to join in. In the meantime, let me share my screen. So how's everyone doing today? Where are you guys joining from?
I'm joining from my dorm here at Rollins. I'm a first year.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I am at home here in Orlando. Also here in Orlando, but more specifically down the street from Rollins in Winter Park.
I'm so glad everyone can make it tonight to join. We are going to pull this up right here. Can everyone see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I think we can get started. Thank you guys again for joining today. I want to make this an open discussion with everyone, so feel free at any point to unmute yourselves and chime in or to comment in the chat box. So going to introduce myself. My name is Maia Bhikarrie. I'm a senior here at Rollins, majoring in art history and minoring in global health. I am the Fred Hicks Curatorial Fellow here at the Rollins Museum of Art. So that basically means that I work closely with our curator and, do a lot of research and working closely with the exhibitions on show at the museum. So this month for March, we are celebrating Women's History. So that's very exciting. We are going to be taking a look at a group of 4 works from the Alfond collection of contemporary art that focus on themes of feminism, and these artists chose to represent these in various ways. We have 2 artists that focus on the female anatomy, and 2 artists that also focus more on experimentation and showcasing identity and female representation. So yeah, I chose these works more so for my interest in the body and, learning more about art processes and how they choose to come about these artworks. So without further ado, let's get started. And again, feel free at any point to chime in, ask any questions that you may have, and let's make this a really great discussion. So here we have the first work that we will be talking about. This is Tip Dipso from 2013, and it is by Charline Von Heyl, and it's an acrylic and oil on canvas. This artist was born in Germany in 1960, and she attended the University of Fine Arts in Hamburg, as well as Dusseldorf Art Academy. Later on, after graduation, she moved to New York City, and that was around 1994. And she currently lives and works there in her studio in Brooklyn, working as an abstract painter. So what I find really interesting about this artist is that she always tries to find new techniques and work with different mediums in her works. And she even claims that she desires to invent an image that has not yet been seen. So I find that really interesting that she creates this kind of experimentation in her work of always trying to create something new, and you're not going to see the same thing each time. In her work, she's best known for like layered compositions. And that would be through blending collage, working with abstraction, and using those geometric forms. And I think that's very evident when we look at this work. Here we can see all of those mediums being utilized. Especially, I don't know how clear you guys can see the detail of this work on the screen, but even in the background, you can see these elements being layered together. You can see this kind of ribbon-like use of line and how they kind of interweave with each other. And using those geometric forms as well, you can see like the little squares going around the borderline. And what's also interesting is seeing the underlaying of the background, how in tune with this pastel kind of coloring in the background, you can also see those use of those geometric forms and those shadings being put together. Yeah, and I just think that that's really, really interesting. And another fun fact about this artist is that Charline Von Heyl doesn't set herself to one particular art style. You know, she likes to incorporate many different elements into her work and, you know, referencing them, but she likes to create something new and not having that one set narrative attached to her work. So it's more so a sense of open-endedness and creating, you know, a different feel to her work than just pinpointing it down to one specific art form, art style, or narrative. So with that, I see, I found a quote that kind of, you know, embodies what she wants to accomplish with this work as well as with her other works in general. And that states that what I am trying to do is to create an image that has the iconic value of a sign but remains ambiguous in its meaning. Something that feels like a representation but isn't. Something that looks like it has a content or a narrative but hasn't. And from this quote, we can understand how her works kind of hold that unidentifiable like aspect to it of having like not one set narrative, and instead it creates a space for open-ended interpretations and allowing viewers to spend time with the artwork and, you know, use those critical thinking skills to try to create their own sense of meaning and their own relationship with her artwork. And that's something that she really encourages, is having viewers spend a lot of time looking at her works, finding new elements, and creating their own interpretations and having the art really speak for itself more so than her distinctly telling you what it means. So yeah, with that, I'm really curious to know like what open-ended interpretations that you guys may have when you look at this work. So please share your thoughts. I'd love to know. As we wait for some comments, I'd like to share like what I think of when I see this work. And for me, this work kind of, I think about, you know, that sense of female identity, and I look at this and I just see science. And that's more so, you know, in tune with my area of studies and what I'm interested in, you know. So I'm using my personal experiences or knowledge to create that kind of interpretation of this work myself. And I say that mainly because of certain elements that we can try to pinpoint in this work, specifically in the left corner where we can see these gestural marks of line with like highlighted in black. And that to me looks like the X chromosome. So like thinking about like DNA of women and their identity and how they are represented, which I think is really, really interesting. Oops.
I personally don't know much about art, but I'm glad that you said the science thing, because I kind of thought something similar and I thought I was way off, but I have no connection to science. So it's an interesting piece.
Yeah, I mean, anything that comes to mind really, you know, can be, like, there's no wrong or right answer, you know. It's the longer you look at the work and the more you think about it, you can definitely figure out a lot of things and try to piece together different aspects and come up with different meanings. Would anyone else like to share?
Can I ask you, Maia, how are you all, and maybe you said this in the beginning and I didn't focus on it. How did you all decide on these pieces, on these particular pieces that you're talking about tonight?
Well, I chose them based off of my interest. So, but like in general, these 4 works today are focusing on women artists for Women's History Month. And I just chose 4 works that I really liked and thought were really interesting based off of my personal interest in study or like what I like seeing in art.
Oh, okay, good. That's the part. I knew about the Women History Month, but I didn't know. Okay, so you picked these. Good.
Yes,
okay.
I did.
Very cool.
But yeah, I think, you know, in summing up this work, it's really, this artist is showing a lot of different types of experimentation and, you know, trying to not create what she has seen before. And she's really training the viewers, like I said, to take their time in looking at this work and, you know, looking at the different layers and its complexities and forming their own open-ended interpretations. So we are going to move to our second work. There we are. Okay. So this work is by Sara VanDerBeek. The artist was born in 1976 in Baltimore, Maryland. And the name of this work is Roman Woman 10. And this is from 2013. It is a digital seed print. So it is a photograph that has been digitally, that has been done digitally. So yeah, this work is currently on view at the Alfond Inn. So I encourage you guys, you know, whenever you have the chance to go see it in person. And same with the first work, actually. I don't think I mentioned that. But yeah, both of these works you can see in the Alfond, so that's really exciting. So a little about this artist. She was, like I said, born in Baltimore, Maryland, and there she studied visual arts at the Baltimore School of Arts, and then moved to New York and attending Cooper Union in 1994. She still is currently a New York-based artist, and she focuses on photography. Sara VanDerBeek is also best known for taking photographs of sculptural classical figures, like this work. And she really, that's one of her main interests. And through this interest, she found a relationship between ancient art and antiquity, as well as, the replication of photographs that come together and highlight these poses and forms of sculptures that you would see in art history in classical antiquity. And I also have a quote from her that talks about her, her process and kind of how she interprets the narrative of this work. And that says, they are iconographic and symbolic of our ideas of the past and our ideals. But most importantly, they are, in their current state, a meeting of times. So from this quote, we see that she's curious about the relationship between history and kind of contemplating that idea of how the body is represented from art history in antiquity to present day. And it's showing those new perspectives of how that has changed over time, which it definitely has. And, these works were kind of inspired by not only her personal interest in these classical figures, but also by her traveling and her seeing these works of art in person, and also with her work experience, which I will touch on a bit. So she took a trip to Europe for a while, and there she visited many museums. So traveling, in places like Rome, in Paris, and in Naples, and really seeking out to see these classical sculptures and how the body was formed and kind of presented in that kind of way. And she uses that as inspiration for her work to kind of show, that kind of representation of the female body. And in addition to that, she spent 3 years, I believe, working in London as a commercial photographer. And while there, she had the opportunity to do a project where she photographed a series of dancers who were doing a theater performance. And through that performance, she was very interested in the way that the body moved, and how that kind of shows how, in kind of a contemporary movement of the body, so to say, and how that kind of changes over time. So we have her visiting museums, looking at, the classical form of the body and combining those elements of her seeing these contemporary dancers and combining both of them together in prints like these, where it kind of, you know, changes the meaning. And she's also interested in how a camera can like create this image that's sort of fixed, but you can also see that shift in perspective, which I think is really important to what she wanted to convey. And you can even see that with the saturation of this print. You can see the saturation of purple and blue hues, and that kind of creates this dreamlike state, which adds more to this work, which is really interesting. And for part of that, I also think that you know, the fact that this print was created by a woman says a lot. Like, when you think of classical antiquity, the main artists who created those works were men. So it's stemming from men ideals and male perspectives of how the women's body, you know, of how women's bodies were portrayed. And to see that change over time of now, you know, we have Sara VanDerBeek, who is showing a more modern take to it, and, you know, depicting her views on what the body should look like. It really shows that kind of evolution and that change in art history, which I think is really fascinating. So yeah. And please, again, like, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to ask at any point. I think with this work, what I also thought was really interesting was that the artist herself would, after photographing these sculptures, she would destroy them and just break them down. And I think that's really cool as well. All right, so let's see. I think it's safe to move on to the next. Let's see, are there any questions? Love this one, almost close. Yes, it was always interesting to me. So Natalie says, this is always interesting to me, the way the female body is depicted, for example, Greek goddess versus Renaissance bodies. Yes, exactly. You know, you see that each art movement or each time period kind of has a different representation of the female body, and that is very interesting. So we keep seeing that change over time. Okay. The third work that we'll be looking at this evening is by Keough. This artist was born in 1982 in Alaska, and the name of this work is Renaissance Painting from 2016, and it is an acrylic on canvas. So this artist is currently a New York-based artist, but she received her BFA from Cooper Union in 2006 and received her MFA from Bard College in 2011. And for this work, it's combining a lot of elements from the Renaissance era and combining that with more contemporary modern ideas, again, pertaining to the female form, which is really interesting. So this work is highly influenced by her interest in design, art history, specifically the Renaissance era, and in medical science. And again, that's kind of, why this painting is entitled Renaissance painting. It kind of feeds off of certain ideas from that time period, specifically with the suit of armor that we see covering the female body. And that's referencing mainly the protection and kind of that vulnerability that more so protection and power that you would see with males in the Renaissance era who wore these suit of armors. And here we can see her combining that with more contemporary elements, and you can see that with the floral patterns in the background, as well as showing the female like organs and glands, endocrine glands on the outside of the body. And again, here it's showing, similar to VanDerBeek's, that change over time of how artists view the female body. But with this work in particular, what's really interesting is her techniques. So I want to talk with you guys a little bit about that. So first, she makes a drawing of her works and then copies them onto enlarged canvases using a grid system. And then afterwards, she would focus on the painting details. And this also goes with her background, again, in technical illustration. And with that, we can see through, again, like the backgrounds, you can see those different kind of like geometric elements added into the back of the work. And something that the themes that are represented here are mainly through gender and female representation and identity. And those interests come about through again the ways that it's used in history. So with her art background, she references a lot of medical books, but in particular she references The Human Body by Fritz Kahn, who was a physician, and that shows the biological systems, including like the organs, tissues, and glands. And from that, she focuses on those of the female and trying to create that sense of power and control, but now through a woman's body, which is really cool. But yeah, a lot of her design elements come through from not only, like her schooling or her interests like that, but it also comes from her family. She was introduced to art at an early age. So she has a quote here that says, "My dad is an artist, a painter, and printmaker. I spent a lot of time in his studio growing up, and we went to see lots of art shows, art museums, but also whatever was going on locally. My dad was pretty serious about drawing. He's an excellent draftsman. He gave me drawing lessons as a kid and through high school, sometimes going to live drawing sessions or exercises to do with shading, line quality, and observation. And with this quote, I think that just adds to her exposure of these mediums and techniques that you can see in her art, especially focusing more on the form of the body. Here we can see that, it's kind of fragmented, and you're not really seeing arms or a head. It's more so focusing on that armor and on those glands, bringing the inside organs to be shown on the out, again, showing that sense of like vulnerability of the female body. So yeah, I'm curious to hear some ideas of what you guys think about this work, or comment like first reactions or what you really like.
Well, I like at the end you said vulnerability, and I couldn't pin it on that, but when I looked at it, I'm like, it's like she's got an armor, but everything that is sacred or that is vulnerable is exposed, and you use that word vulnerable, and I thought, okay, that's what it is.
Yes, definitely.
It's interesting.
It is, yeah. I think that's the interesting part. She's kind of showing that, it's like wearing your heart out on your sleeve, kind of like everything is exposed, but still, you have that level of protection and that level of power, which says a lot. Yeah. Yes, it's like her insides are exposed through armor. Yes, definitely. Okay. With that, I think we can move on to our last work. So this piece is by Jennifer Bartlett, and she is an American artist that was born in 1941, specifically in California. And the name of this artwork is Alphabet 6 from 1993, and it is an enamel over silkscreen grid on baked enamel steel plates. And that's a very interesting process that later I will get to. But for now, on the artist herself, she is currently an active artist in New York, as well as in France. Her husband is French, so she spends a lot of time, in both places. And they both kind of influence her work. She is a graduate with her BA at Mills College in 1963. And later on, she earned a spot in Yale's graduate program, again, focusing on that kind of art illustration. With that being said, her mother was a fashion illustrator. So I think that has kind of an influence on the kind of fabrics or like elements that she chooses to include in her artwork, especially with this grid format. You can see a lot of different colors and a lot of different abstract elements that that speak a lot to her background and what art processes that she's interested in. And specifically in her work, she likes to combine both aesthetics of representational art, but also abstract art. What's really interesting is that she doesn't see a difference between the two, or she doesn't see why it's like a competitive kind of element to that. She sees it as room to use both aspects in her work at one time, and that's definitely true to this work in particular. We can also think about the movements that were going on around her time when she was in school, and that was mostly focusing on minimalism. So having that kind of simplicity of shapes and colors, and we see that a lot through this work in particular as well. She uses a lot of geometric shapes. We can point some out. You can see we have squares and rectangles. You can see these little crescents, and then also her use of line. And by using these light hues of like grays, yellows, blues, and stuff like that, we can see, you know, those mediums shining through in her work. And so that and then also creating, we see in that last little grid on the bottom, there's a little rabbit. So again, that shows, you know, her use of both abstract and representational, combining the two together, which is really, really interesting. And also we can see that, you know, in her art process of how she creates this work, it really also, like, it also brings that whole story together. So at that time in the 60s and 70s, using these enamel plates were very popular. And it's this kind of process where it's including like smaller square grids, and with those grids you combine them together, and you use the enamel as kind of like a varnish, so to say, that you would put over these steel plates to kind of harden them and create like and then you would bake them to create like the space for you to fill the paint in, sorry. And I think it's a really interesting process. It's very tedious and complex. You kind of, you know, create these plates one at a time, and then she puts them together to create this larger work. And through that larger work, we can see how each of these plates kind of connect with one another. And yeah, I think it's really, really beautiful. And also each of the plates consist of like a sheet of like graphing paper, and that kind of allows the artists to rework individual squares if need be, and, you know, kind of piece all of these little grid patterns together. So yeah, are there any questions? This like the first is more artsy, exactly. So Natalie says, this like the first is more artsy, not focused on a gender issue or politics. Which is your favorite? Ooh. So yeah, I agree with you. You know, there's definitely two that are more focused on certain issues, and then two that are more artsy and focusing on that level of like experimentation, and more so showcasing technique. That's a good question. Of my favorite, I would definitely say either the VanDerBeek or the Keough. Let's go back to those two. So here's the Keough. And then here's Sara VanDerBeek's. And that is more so for my personal interest. I really like, you know, showing that form of identity, and anything interested with the body really fascinates me. And, you know, seeing how you can kind of track that change from art history to now over time. I think that's really fascinating. So I'll definitely say the VanDerBeek or the Keough.
I'm an artsy neophyte, so I have no clue about art. However, I tend to agree with you that those were the more interesting ones. And is it the VanDerBeek one, the one with yes, that one. That one is always of interest to me, how women's bodies are depicted over time. And, you know, you look at the Renaissance woman, you look at Twiggy in the 60s, you know, and I know she's a model, and that's not art in and of itself, but it's a way of that women's bodies were appreciated over time. And so I think that that's very interesting. And then the other one, the following one, I forgot the name.
The Renaissance painting.
Yes. That one's just interesting to me because I think that it's so different. And I don't know, I really feel vulnerable when I look at that. Like you're this strong, tough, and then you're exposed.
Definitely, yeah. So
it's interesting artworks.
Yes. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no, thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. And I know we're not on camera other than you, but I am having a cocktail because it is a happy hour. So
yes.
Thank you.
Perfect. But yeah, just, you know, summing up these works, like I said before, they all have these different perspectives of you know, female empowerment and feminism. You see that more through the literal context in some of these works with that female anatomical forms. And in the other two, you see them in a more, you know, technical kind of way, and how they implement their interests and their techniques and their art process to create these works and develop something new. So yeah. So if there are any more questions, feel free.
I don't have any more questions, but I do want to thank you. This was very cool.
Thank you. Definitely. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing here. Oops, okay, there we go. Is it still sharing or?
I don't see anything. I don't see your slides.
Okay.
We're still all on, and I think it's still recording.
Okay. But yeah, so thank you guys. I want to thank you all for joining this evening and, you know, having this great discussion. I really appreciate your comments. But yeah, and again, if you're in the area, feel free to visit the Alfond and take a look at these works in person. 3 of them are on view. So we have the first work, which was the Tidipso by Charline Von Heyl, the Jennifer Bartlett work, and the Sara VanDerBeek work. So definitely take a look at these in person. They're very interesting to see, all the detailed up and close. Thank you again. Join in definitely for the next happy hour tour. And yeah, thank you guys so much for joining. Bye. Have a good night, guys.